The opening question on the first picture is, men, what's the weirdest reason a woman has given for, in quotes, not being a real man? I used an umbrella. Apparently, I meant to evaporate rain out of the sky with my masculine aura. It gets worse than that.
Okay.
Because I wouldn't hit her. Can you believe it gets even worse than that? Since I wouldn't choke, slap, and basically beat her during sex.
Oh no.
We asked the question how we would approach raising our son in that climate.
Biggest thing for me is I want a son with self-esteem and a sense that he's cared for and loved and good enough, is unlikely to be vulnerable to grooming and unlikely to need to misuse his power in ways that are violent to other people, but also are violent at some level to his own humanity and sense of self. Roots and rigor, rigor and flow. Roots and rigor, rigor and flow. Roots and rigor, rigor and flow. Rigor and flow.
One. Welcome back to Rigor and Flow with me, Iwan.
And me, Tamanda, the show where business meets love.
And culture meets critique. What have we got on today?
Today, we are discussing all things women and patriarchy.
Ooh.
That sounds like such a broad category. We could go so many places.
And it also sounds like if you were just listening to that as a bit of a quick intro, you might think it's the bog standard ways that it's been discussed over the last sort of few years. But we're actually
we've put a lot of thought into how
absolutely.
Can we talk about this in a way that's helpful and meaningful for us and where we are in our lives at this stage.
Yes.
And the next generation. But anyway, you kick us off. You had brought something that you wanted to discuss.
So I came across a post by an account called The Tin Men. The opening question on the first picture is, men, what's the weirdest reason a woman has given for, in quotes, not being a real man? Oof. And I'm going to read out some of the reasons, the weird reasons that some of the women have given. And this has been submitted by men.
This is a by and for men account, right?
It is.
Okay.
So the Tin Men are an account who, their profile literally says, widening perspectives around men, uncomfortable conversations and ugly truths, the unpopular other half of gender equality and men's mental health.
Okay.
So
the unpopular other half, that's almost in the world of men's rights activists.
Yeah.
But anyway, go on. Yeah.
One of the reasons given is this. I used an umbrella. Apparently, I meant to evaporate rain out of the sky with my masculine aura.
Oh, God. Okay.
Then we have, I was below 5'7".
Oh, that's not good.
Then we have using chapstick.
Really? Being
a stay-at-home dad.
Wow, that's kind of
hit me.
wild because that's so unfair.
Yeah.
You'd never get away with saying that to a mum.
No, not at all.
And what would be wrong with being a stay-at-home dad?
But then women who go to work are often, have been in the past, depicted as bad mums for going to work and leaving their kids at home. So I guess it's the inverse of that. That's what they're saying, right? It's the inverse.
You're coming outside of the script that has been assigned to you of your gender.
Exactly. It gets worse.
Okay.
Because I would apologize when I fucked up.
Who doesn't want an apology? Because I would apologize when I fucked up. So what did she say? This person said he's not a real man? Because he apologizes?
Those are one of the weird reasons, right? That women have given for a man not being a real man. It gets worse than that.
Okay.
Because I wouldn't...
I wish I could pretend I was surprised, but anyway, go on.
Because I wouldn't hit her.
I've actually heard that one.
Okay.
Yeah.
In what context?
Okay, if you ask, I was in a long-term relationship with someone who told me at the beginning of the relationship that he had been with a woman beforehand who he described it almost as goading. that he would poke and poke just to try and get a response out of her. No, sorry, she would poke and poke just to try and get a response out of him.
Yes.
And he said it was like he's never felt any desire for violence. He didn't grow up in a violent household, and he knew it was a problem when he started getting so frustrated that she wouldn't hear him. And it was almost like she equated love with abuse or highly toxic behavior. And so, yeah, she had basically said stuff to him like, "You're not a real man," because he wouldn't be, I guess, violent towards her.
Wow.
Yeah. She must have been quite traumatized.
Can you believe it gets even worse than that? Since I wouldn't choke, slap, and basically beat her during sex.
Oh, no.
I had a woman over for dinner and she asked, who cleans my house and how much they cost? I said, I don't pay someone to clean my house. I just pick up after myself. She told me, real men don't clean or cook. Followed by, it's 2020. Just come out the closet and get yourself some dick.
Shouldn't laugh at that, but like, what?
It's wild.
I mean, I have so much to say right now. Can I say something?
Yeah, there's some crazy ones.
It's just like, so I'm just like, I'm not about to put out the sympathy parade for all men right now. But if I was a guy or a young boy growing up in this world and I was reading stuff like that, having just been bashed for never picking up, never doing the household chores, putting all sorts of domestic labor into women's hands.
Yep.
I would feel, especially if I was a young man, I think, really quite bemused and confused, honestly.
These are confusing times for men and boys. It really is confusing times because so much is shifting and changing, but so much of the old scripts are still there.
So intact.
And so it's absolutely crazy.
Yeah. What else is there?
There are some kind of ones that are a little bit funny.
Okay.
I shouldn't laugh, but two in particular were having cats.
Oh, get a grip. Okay.
And then I wore an apron whilst cooking.
Who are these women?
I don't know. I don't know where they come from.
Wow.
So this is an interesting one because it really shows the kind of between a rock and a hard place that men can sometimes get with women. And so this woman, woman number one, you're not wearing an undershirt. That's something a kid would do, not a man. Woman number two, a few months later, you're wearing an undershirt with that. That's what little boys do.
Oh no. 2 months later. So he ditched one he jumped from the frying pan into the fire.
Exactly, yeah. And
That is very no win.
It's no win, do you know what I mean? I mean, there's one here like, I declined sex and she proceeded to call me a pussy and tell people I am gay.
Yeah, no, okay, I feel like we're going to talk about this because I want to know how you chose these, but I feel like I've heard a version of that story multiple times from men I know all in my life. Yeah.
It's crazy.
Which I think is completely out of order because essentially that kind of response is not just promoting an unhealthy model of masculinity and patriarchy. It's also, it borders on coercive.
Yes, it does.
Because you're basically shaming or pressuring someone for not wanting to have sex with you.
Yep. That's basically it.
Like against everything consent practice speaks to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So these are some of the things that women say to men that in essence uphold a toxic patriarchal model.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what were your reactions to this post and what made you choose this?
I think when I first saw just the question, so the first picture, you know, what are some of the weird reasons that women say to men for not being a real man? I just thought it was going to be a bit laugh out loud and a bit
stupid,
a bit silly. Do you know what I mean? I'd be like, well, yeah. But as I flicked through each page, I could just feel my heart sinking. I just felt so sad that this is happening between men and women, and that despite all the conversations we're having, women are still upholding some of the more toxic parts of, I guess, masculinity. And I guess it's scripts that they've been taught in their lives, by the men in their lives, by the women in their lives, by society, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's so weird because looking at this, I feel like I can think of, off the top of my head, multiple versions of a story like this. And I feel like I should be more shocked than I am, but I'm not. I already mentioned one ex and what they said. And that same ex also has come back to me at a different time, long after we broke up. And one of the things that they said to me was, when I was processing the end of our relationship, I realized that my communication wasn't good enough. And they had gone into looking at healthy models of masculinity and connecting with their emotions and being vulnerable, which I kind of agree was an issue in the relationship. And what they had said to me was, I've gone out there dating people and I'm being more vulnerable and I'm showing my softer side. And women are claiming they want that. But when they see it, they are just like completely freaking out.
Yeah.
And I was like, God, how sad is that? And I was like, well, of course it makes sense because he was now disrupting the script that's well worn.
Yes.
And so even people who claim that they want a more vulnerable man and that they're ready for it, until they've had it in front of them, you may not know how to deal with it. It's like an entirely nobody has a script for that, right? And I could very much relate to that in terms of all the disrupting of scripts I'd been doing about race.
Yes.
And I was just like, that's wild. Yeah.
Even me with sexuality, when I came out of the church and was trying to reconcile faith and sexuality, in our first episode, I talk about encountering Reverend G-Day from House of Rainbow and him saying that G-A-Y, God adores you. And I couldn't accept it. It completely disrupted the script I had, which is that homosexuality, same-sex relationships are a sin. They're not natural. They're an abomination. It's hard to disrupt that conditioning.
Yeah.
And this conditioning that we're talking about isn't conditioning from the last 100 years. It's conditioning for a lot longer.
For millennia.
Yeah.
And so in this episode, we wanted to talk about patriarchy, but we wanted to come at it from a slightly different angle.
Which is kind of trying to answer the question, which is, in episode 4 of this podcast, we talked about our journey with fertility and wanting to have children. We were thinking, if we had a boy, how would we raise our son in this current climate where everything is up in the air?
Yep.
All the scripts are being rewritten, while some of the scripts still remain as the foundation, the toxic foundation for this thing called relationships between men and women. How would we raise our son?
Yeah. And I mean, even as you say it, I am holding two things in my head. Like, one is, I know that when you imagine having a baby, you deeply want a son.
Yes.
You've always had that.
Yeah.
Whereas I always kind of imagined a girl. I mean, I'd be happy with any, but I have. So I'm like, I know this is a very real dream or fantasy for you. And then on the other side, I'm just holding just how challenging it is as a prospect for me, because there is so much to do to protect any child you raise right now. But I think a boy in particular would challenge me
more
massively.
than a girl.
I think so.
Wow.
What I mean by that is, I think any gender child that I had would bring up stuff for me.
Yeah.
Okay. But in a way, I think I've done so much more work for the girl because that work existed in me to do.
Okay.
A boy would be a confrontation because I don't have that experience of being a boy. And there's so many things, as I'm sure we'll get into, that men and boys have put me through that I would really, it's hard for me to take the other position.
And that's what we're going to explore.
Yeah.
So let's get into it.
Let's do it. If we had this boy that you so dream of, what do you think would be the most challenging things about raising him in this current climate?
I think the rise of the red pill bros. I don't know what to call them, to be honest. But certainly this, people like the Andrew Tates and the pull of a certain side of the internet that really draws young men in, particularly when they're at that awkward stage where they're still trying to figure out who they are and they're getting, certain messages from their peers, maybe from girls, if they don't feel like they add up to whatever it is that society is telling them is a strong boy or a strong man, then there could be a tendency for them to slip into that side of the internet.
Yep, for sure, 100%.
So I think that is the biggest thing that worries me.
Yeah. I'm curious, actually. When you were a teacher, I know you were primary school, so maybe they're not in that weird, awkward stage yet.
I've taught from primary through to university.
Yeah, of course you have, yeah. So do you feel like as a teacher, you have observed any of these like risks of them being drawn in directly?
Well, no, because I feel like this kind of Andrew Tate, incel, red pill, whatever you want to call it, thing, this sludge of toxicity that we're in now wasn't as prevalent back then when I was teaching.
Oh, really?
It wasn't as strong. Like kids barking at teachers in the hallway.
That's a real thing. The Guardian and Metro were reporting on a survey that had recently been done, which were talking about the rising instances of misogyny and racism, precisely because of the Andrew Tate. And one of the stories they kept repeating from this survey was teachers talking about being barked at in the corridors by young boys because these groups of like incels were basically encouraging this kind of behavior online.
Yeah, see, I don't recall anything like that. Boys were always more boisterous, whether people agree that there's differences between them or not. I can say that I've definitely seen firsthand the difference between boys and girls.
Yeah.
They're more boisterous. They tend to be more aggressive. They're more just bigger and louder and take up more space.
Sure do. From experience.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they do those things. They push the boundaries, I suppose all children push the boundaries. But I guess the ways that boys tend to push the boundaries tends to be different in my experience than the way girls push the boundaries. It tends to be more obvious and more upfront and stuff like that. So it might be, them fighting in class, for example, with each other. It might be shouting out, it might be just their silly jokes that they make that they all think are funny amongst themselves. Sometimes they might have a little bit of a twinge of sexual connotations to them and then you nip it in the bud as a teacher. But certainly none of the things that I've never seen a student barking at a teacher or making very obvious sexual comments directly to a teacher that are actually quite have elements of almost like violation in those sorts of comments. I can say that I've never experienced that or seen it in my career as a teacher.
That's true. I was actually going to talk about how I have seen in my work, like continuities for a long time on this issue. But you're right. I think there's something very specific about this moment with kids being bold enough to do it with a teacher rather than a peer.
Yes.
What does that mean? Like, it's interesting because I've seen this looking at teachers or social workers who work in schools who are, say, Black, and then they have a kid do something racist towards them as the teacher, and there's no safeguarding for that. But this is like another level of that. It's like, what about boys being sexually coercive or patriarchal or misogynistic towards their teachers? Like, I don't ever remember hearing that kind of thing.
Yeah, not to that level.
No, not to that level of boldness and normalized, flagrant, you're going to do this with a teacher. Like, what is going on?
Yeah. But I think more broadly, from what I've been reading, and because I like to keep on top of the education space, and what I've been reading and watching about the education space is that respect towards teachers is at an all-time low.
Yeah.
So much so that teachers are leaving the profession in their droves, and it's just a high churn within education currently.
100%. Yeah, that's like a well-known issue, and not just in high school, but in universities as well. Like I see it all the time spoken on this Women in Academia support network group that I'm on. Like, how do you respond to students that just don't hold the same level of respect for hierarchy that previous generations of students did?
Yeah. And you're responsible for those kids for the 6-8 hours that they're in your care. You basically are the parent for that period of time. So if they don't respect you, how can you do your job? But also, how can you protect them and safeguard them?
Yeah. And it's far more complicated, as you say, when they're a minor. In a way, with higher education, they're an adult and therefore can face adult repercussions and be held to account. When you're a teacher in a high school, there's some expectation that you're supposed to be educating them out of these behaviors or into wiser actions.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you may be facing kinds of abuse.
And you don't have the same disciplinary capabilities that a parent has.
That's true. Yeah, you're very much bound by the school policies, legalities, and a cautious line that you're walking around what a parent would do versus you.
Exactly.
You know? It's interesting because going back to things that feel fairly stable, in 2015 maybe, I had the opportunity to work in a 3-organisation partnership between Plan International, which you may know as a charity that does work for women and girls. It's often thought of as an international development charity that works, you know, in the developing world, for want of a better word. But they also do a lot of work with women and girls in the UK around period poverty and things like that, and misogyny. So it's a partnership between them, an organisation called Fearless Futures, which is advocating for women and girls in the workplace, and then another organisation called The Great Initiative, which did work on with boys and men about masculinity. We were putting on a conference for teachers and head teachers around misogyny in schools. And I remember at that time being utterly staggered by the stuff I had read from kids growing up all that time ago. Were you a teacher then?
When?
2015-ish.
Yes, I was.
Okay. So during the time you were a teacher, the sorts of things we're reading, they weren't about teachers, it was peer-to-peer, but girls were talking about sexting, being under pressure.
Now that was a big thing. The peer-to-peer thing, yes, there was so much going on in that space because you had the rise of smartphones.
Yes. So what did you see on that?
That sort of thing, sexting, girls being asked to send images of nudes, to people, and then that spreading around the school. I remember there was a whole thing of happy slapping.
What's that?
So that was where these kids would go onto a bus, for example, and one of them would just out of the blue slap a passenger on the bus, but then they'd be filming it.
And was this boys and girls doing it?
It was mostly boys. It was mostly boys.
Yeah.
So you're seeing the beginnings, like the seeds of what we have today, but it was more about peer-to-peer and the stupid stuff that they were doing with their phones within their peer groups and then sharing it on various platforms, whether that was Snapchat or wherever it was, YouTube.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that was the kind of thing that really shocked me, that there was this real coercion and bullying and peer pressure and almost, almost like blackmailing other kids into even sexual acts, because I have nudes of you that I can share with people if you don't do X, Y, or Z, like real stories of sexual coercion. And I remember even at that time, I had no interest in having kids at the time, being like, whoa, if I were ever to have a kid, I would really need to wake up to a world I can't even begin to understand, because I did not grow up with this level of online harm.
And that's the thing. That's what we'd be navigating, is that we didn't grow up with that. So how do we handle something that we don't fully understand?
Totally. Absolutely petrifying. And I think on that, you have to look at A, what young people are saying, and B, look at some of the research that exists. So one of the things I encountered last year, I was working on something, a community campaign on data, where a bunch of activists and organisers were thinking about how to use storytelling and research and data to create change. And there was this brilliant campaign set up by a couple of young women in Leeds. One of them is called Roxy. I forget her surname now. But anyway, they set up this campaign called Behind Our Screens. They're starting to get a load of traction now. And both of them had direct experience of extreme harm at the hands of peers because of online use. Same sorts of things, sexting, nudes, things being used against them. And in one case, it turned into a very severe mental health crisis and suicidality. And their whole campaign is about getting young people to submit their own stories and testimonies of the harm that they faced so that they can use that to influence policy and the kinds of safeguarding measures that are happening. So I feel like if we were a parent, like one of the first things I'd want to do is like just go and understand from those young people directly, what is the gap that I do not understand your world. Tell me what you went through. Tell me how it manifests. Tell me how it impacts you. And what would you do differently if you were a parent?
I think that's the key, isn't it? What would you have wanted the adults in your life to have done in that time where you were going through that extreme bullying?
Yeah. Do you remember
what would have worked?
Yeah. And do you remember any attempts, I'm asking you now personally, when that was all kicking off in the schools you taught in, were there any attempts to regulate it or deal
Absolutely,
with it?
yeah. So, there was like handing your phones in. So at the start of the day, you'd just like get everybody's phones and you'd put them into a big bag and then it would just go away for the day or for that lesson. So there were definitely conversations around how do we make sure that these devices are not being weaponized on school premises. So that was one way to regulate it. The other way was we would have people come in and do workshops, mostly for the staff. So they would come in and talk to us on like our inset days to talk to us about what's actually going on out there in the world of these young people, pre-teens and teens. So the platforms they're using, what they're doing on those platforms and the harm that is being caused and the signs to look out for when that's going on, and to make sure that you make it clear to the kids that they can come and talk to you, but also that there is zero tolerance for that sort of thing in school.
Yeah.
So we had we were having these discussions, obviously relative to the discussions that are happening now. Obviously, these were the early discussions.
Yeah.
And obviously, it's come a long way now. But yeah, we were definitely having those conversations.
Do you remember anything of what they told you? You said they told you about signs to look out for. Do you remember what they said?
Yeah, so it was things like if it seems like a kid that normally was quite outgoing and part of a particular group is suddenly not.
Withdrawn.
So they're withdrawing or they're on their own. So where normally on the playground, they might be playing together. Now that kid is over here on their own and the friends are over there and they're not coming together. And you're seeing that as a pervasive thing. So isolation, essentially. That was one thing to look out for.
I started when I was realizing the scale of this issue recently, doing like some research of like how would you even know? And I came across these brilliant sets of drawings by someone called, their profile name is Vulgar Drawings, where they've basically done a map of misogyny. And I think they're quite a strong feminist and then got some pushback on some of the stuff they were doing about incels and the kind of grooming of boys online. And what ended up happening to them is their work got reported to a subreddit thread. And then suddenly all of these red pill incel men's activist types started commenting on their thread, and they decided to start spending some time on the Reddit threads and figuring out who these people were, how they talk. And I found it so enlightening because they break down all this stuff about what happens, what kind of language these people are using, how it impacts them, etc.
Yeah, because it's like we're saying red pill this, but some people may not even know what red pill is.
Or an incel. So should we get it out and talk about it?
I think that we should definitely talk a little bit about it.
Okay, so we've got Vulgar Drawings in front of us. And obviously she's decided to spend time with the incels. What actually are incels?
I understand it as involuntary celibates. And these are, I guess, men who struggle to build relationships with women. And so as a result, they're celibate, but involuntarily. They would like to, whether they admit it or not, have relationships with women, but they're unable to, for whatever reason.
they're unable to, but the core thing also is that apparently they blame their lack of availability of sexual experiences on women and society.
Yes. And that's where it gets dangerous, isn't it? That's what makes the community, right? Is that they are actively blaming other people for their problems.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And specifically women.
Yeah.
That is quite important.
As opposed to just changing their ways.
Yeah, exactly. Or maybe, anyway, we can get into that. But one of the things I found so fascinating learning more about this world is, as all worlds, there's a whole language that I just didn't know. Like, these dudes are talking about people called femoids, people called normies. I'm not going to lie, I don't even know. But I know one thing I will do is if we have a son, if I hear them saying femoid, normie, simp, Stacey, or based, apparently those are words to look out for.
Then we'll be like, no. Yes. And then he'll go even further because then it's that rebellious phase, isn't it?
It's true. That's also a tricky thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's all these languages and then there's all of these ideologies they have. So I didn't realize that they also dislike other men.
Oh, yeah.
And these other men that they dislike, they call chads.
Yeah.
And the stereotype of a chad is basically like your stereotypical, attractive, good-looking guy.
Muscles.
Muscular, and basically able to attract women.
Yeah,
they're
the top of the social hierarchy.
Yeah.
They have an ease with women. They have partners.
Yes.
A partner or partners.
Exactly. And then you have an equivalent that their partner or partners are Stacey's, who are the female equivalent of chads. And they are also like these blonde, blue-eyed, really, voluptuous, perfect, in a patriarchal fantasy women.
So Hitler's wet dream.
Precisely. So that's the other thing, that the crossover of this ideology with alt-right, like the people that are at the pinnacle are blonde, blue-eyed, alt-right fantasies, patriarchal fantasies, right?
Yeah.
So...
Because even that picture of that Chad is giving Viking, Nordic...
It is.
Aryan dream.
Yeah, just conventionally attractive. And apparently that all of this, again, it's very right-wing, all of these looks that the Chads and the Stacys have are down to something called lookism.
Oh, okay.
Where it's basically says your genetics and this kind of evolutionary argument that the right love to use. Mm-hmm. It's all down to how you look in your genetics and having it harks back to what do you call it? Eugenic kind of argument, scientific racism, like in operation.
It makes me wonder if there are black incels and what their version of Chad and Stacey is.
I now want to study that.
That's something to be studied.
That is a very
because this is
good
giving
question.
Very white.
Well,
everything about it is giving
alt-right whiteness.
Yeah, exactly. And if you were a black person in that space, I wonder what that looks like.
But I'd imagine that there are many black young men who are vulnerable to this ideology because
but what
it plays on your masculinity.
Would they be okay? Yeah, fair
enough. What I mean?
Yeah.
To get you. I mean, just like there have been black people who support the KKK and all sorts of right-wing things in time. They have. There still are.
I mean,
so
no, that's true. It's true. Yeah.
You only have to be drawn in. We have black people all over conservative.
No, that's true.
Ideology.
Yeah, conservative. I just never. The KKK is the one where I was a bit like, oh, that's.
Do you know that there really are black KKK members?
What?
Yeah,
that doesn't even make any sense.
It's a thing.
Wow. But let's talk about the pills.
I don't understand the pill thing. I'm not going to lie.
Well, she breaks it down as like a blue pill is the least extreme of this kind of thinking. Red pill is slap bang in the middle of the spectrum. And black pill is the most extreme form of this sort of incel identity and ideology.
Oh, I always thought the red pill was the most extreme because you always hear people refer to them as red pill bros.
No, it's black pill. I mean, it's got black in the title. Remember what we said? Black is always the worst of a thing. But yeah, so it's interesting. And red pill people are believe that they are waking up to the truth. They believe in female oppression, and
they're the men's rights activists that believe that men are really oppressed from what I can see.
Oh, okay. So they
diagram.
believe that female oppression is a myth, and that men are really the ones who are the most oppressed.
Yeah,
so that's slap bang in the middle of the spectrum of incel. Yes.
Yeah, and then there's a worse part, which is where you're not just holding this ideology behind your screen quietly.
Yeah,
you're out committing violence.
So in the vulgar diagrams and research, she talks about how the patriarchy sort of comes into play with all of this, And one of the things that she says is there's a lot of loneliness and isolation. These are young men who aren't able to ask for help.
Yeah.
And they don't know how to pull themselves out of whatever it is they're going through, whether that's depression and like we say, loneliness. They feel under pressure to be hypersexual.
Oh, okay. Well, that would make sense because of porn.
Yes,
you know,
exactly.
there is this model of masculinity these young men are having shoved in their face.
Yes.
It's a Chad.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And there's a lack of mental health support and resources that they would be able to access easily and know it's there and how to access it, and that they can access it without feeling less of a man as well, you know? So there's so much.
If you're loving what you're hearing, please don't just listen.
Hit the subscribe button to never miss an episode.
It keeps you in the flow.
And us doing what we love.
Thanks so much for subscribing, and thanks for riding with Rigor and Flow.
Thank you.
Crucially, it seems like that when these men encounter these things, they're blaming us or young girls and women rather than patriarchy itself as a system that means you're not allowed to be lonely and ask for help.
Yes.
You don't have to embody hypersexual behavior to be, I don't know, a man, a real man, going back to that phrase, you know. So how does all this shape their view of women?
Well, it's not good because they blame women for their problems for a start. They normalize violence against women. They think that they're entitled to sex just because they're men.
That's
which is really kind of crazy.
Yeah.
There's a victimhood to it. So like, well, I was nice to her and she didn't give me what I asked for. Therefore, she is and then you can insert expletive, right? So there's a victimhood that's also connected to an entitlement as well.
That's exactly what
that just by being nice, I should suddenly have access to a woman's body.
Yeah. Yeah, no, completely. And it's, you know, going back to that episode where we discussed, I think it was domestic violence and this reverse victimhood narrative. This is almost like that playing out at a widespread social scale.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, it's not a one-to-one interpersonal thing. I'm sure it manifests that way. But it's like there's this whole group of men that have decided that they are the real victims of patriarchy. And of course, they are harmed by patriarchy.
Yeah, they are victims of patriarchy, but just not in the ways that they're saying that they are the victims of... They're saying that they're the victims of women.
Yeah.
And what we're saying is, no, you are the victim of patriarchy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's kind of wild. But anyway, I think that whole thing was very eye-opening. From my point of view, it was very eye-opening insight into what this world is and their narratives.
And the drawings are just funny. Like they really make me laugh. It's really interesting.
Well, funny if it weren't so true and scary. Do you know what I mean? Like one of the things she also says is that this ideology is basically like terrorism. So to me, that says, okay, just the way people get groomed into terrorist things, boys could get groomed and our son could get groomed.
Boys actually are. Not even that they could, they are groomed.
They're being groomed.
Yeah, actively as we sit here. There's a series that came out recently on Netflix called Adolescence.
Oh, yeah.
And other than the technical and creative genius that it is with the one shot throughout the entire episode, in adolescence, you've got this white working class kid whose parents are obviously having to work. He's at home, up in his room, on his computer, gets sucked into really a black pill world, the most extreme version of the incels. And it results in a fatality. The question that kept coming to my mind as I was thinking about this episode is technology is going to be a big factor in how we raise our son and how much access we give him and when. You know, I think that is the battleground right now. I think for a lot of parents is technology and their children.
Yeah. And I mean, I used to be a nanny, so I used to look after kids. And one of the things I remember doing when I was under pressure, even though I was at home, was stick them on an iPad, almost, using it as a, for want of a better substitute nanny parenting tool, because I couldn't do everything, right? I couldn't both watch them and cook their dinner and do all these things that I had to do in a short time frame. How many parents who are under pressure and are working parents, having to work sometimes multiple jobs, having to do that because they can't afford childcare or instead of childcare.
Yeah, I definitely have a lot of empathy because I was raised by a single mum, and you don't have a lot of time. You don't have a lot of time. A lot of your time is consumed with working.
It's true. I mean, if we get your boy and, you know, some miracle baby comes along, how would you want to handle use of like tech, social media, screen time? Do you believe in setting limits? Like,
Yes, I do. I think it's literally the most important thing that a parent can do. There is nothing healthy about being addicted to technology, even when you're an adult. We see, I came off of Instagram because of the effect on my mental health, and I've only recently started posting because of this show. So I would absolutely, it's my job as a parent to be the filter for my child, to protect them from the things that might harm them, because I know that I have that knowledge. That kid doesn't have that knowledge. They just see a fancy phone and they just want to be on it and explore it, right? So yeah, I'll definitely restrict their usage.
Okay, so now we get into the detail of it, but how, in what ways, what would that look like? And would it differ if you had if we had a girl versus if we had a boy?
No, same for the boy and the girl.
Really?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, but would you have different kinds of conversations with them about online? Like what would be, because, you know, for me, I see the harms that we've talked about, that girls face and boys, they're all different sides of the same coin, but they play out quite differently.
They play out differently, but I think both need to know the experiences of the other. I'm always a big proponent of conversations, dialogue. It should be conversations between two. So I would tell my young girls what boys are experiencing, and I'd want her to read about the accounts of young boys and the things that they are going through, the things they're feeling, and how they are viewing the world and viewing women. And I'd want my boy to understand the same as well, you know?
And what about their own experiences? Because you're telling me about the opposite, but what would you say to them about the risks that they face themselves?
Yeah, no, for sure. I'd say I'd like them to understand some of the perils that are out there. I'd want them to read, you know, like you talked about the research where they spoke about kids and their stories of what they've experienced in terms of that extreme bullying. I'd want my girl or my son to read some of those experiences and talk about them together, talk about their own feelings. I don't know if that answered the question. I don't really know what the question is, to be honest.
Well, I'm kind of, you know, so we're talking in pretty binary ways. There's potential that you could have a kid who's like rejects all that, especially in today's society.
But they still need to know about both.
Yeah, all of the experiences would need to be talked about. But I'm also kind of like, you know, one of the pitfalls when I said I would struggle with a boy is that I think I could very easily forget that they are at risk and they are vulnerable and be like, don't go doing this to girls. Do you see what I mean? Like give them more of a warning.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I'm like, because there's such a complex set of things to navigate. Your desire for neither the girl nor the boy to become a perpetrator. You acknowledge that, let's face it, the data shows it skews one way, that the kinds of risks that each face are slightly different, that you don't want a boy to grow up with no self-esteem because he's been told he's an incel who's useless and not a Chad and da-da-da, but equally you don't want him to become harmful.
Yeah.
So do you see what I mean? It's like there's all of those things to unpack.
So I hear what you've just said about being maybe quite firm with your boy about don't harm girls, don't do this, don't do that.
I just want to say,
Go on.
I don't know if I'd be firm. I'm questioning how you go about it. I actually don't know that I have the skills to figure that out.
But I want to explore, where does that come from?
Yeah.
Because it definitely pertains to the boy as opposed to the girl. So where is that instinct coming from?
Okay, therapist. Damn, I didn't expect to get that call out. It's a very good question. I mean, I have to keep it real with you. Like some of these conversations, I feel like as we've been able to name toxic masculinity more and more, we also increasingly come under pressure to understand what effect this has on boys and men to hear about this. But the bottom line is, for me, I have experienced a lot of very toxic behavior at the hands of boys and men.
Right.
And also quite pervasive. I would struggle to say it's been a minority of boys and men. It's not that I haven't seen good models of it. It's just that I've seen fairly widespread models of bad behavior. So I suppose when I think about our boy, I'm thinking that doesn't come from nowhere. That comes from a message those men and boys are receiving from society that normalizes this stuff, and me needing to give them an alternative narrative. Now, how to do that effectively is another matter. Is that enough of an answer, or do you need me to go deeper, my therapist?
Can you go deeper?
I mean, sure. It's like, where do we start and stop with how pervasive that experience
So
is?
I guess let's go a little deeper. And I'd like to ask a question. In what ways has patriarchy shaped your life? And how did that show up in your culture and your home?
Okay, it's actually a good question, because I don't think I became a feminist or believed really in patriarchy until very late, and way later than many of my friends, probably until my late 20s. I was not a feminist.
That's interesting.
And I believed quite strongly that we were already equal. Yeah, I know. Wild.
Okay, that's interesting.
Maybe it was a kind of defense or something.
Okay. Mm-hmm. But it comes from somewhere.
Yeah, it comes from, I think where it came is that I had a white father and a black mother. And in my family of origin, a lot of roles were flipped, in the sense that although my dad came from a background of wealth, my mum was the career woman, the working woman, the one who did long hours, and who was very much more out there, ambitious and speaking her mind and doing these things that a woman gets called aggressive and abrasive for, but very much embody what men are expected to do.
Okay.
And on the flip side, my father, who was a white man, was very gentle, very nurturing. He was mostly in the home with me, not particularly career ambitious, just embodied a lot of sort of feminized behaviors, traits, and things.
Okay.
Right? And so I think that really skewed my impression of how the world was at large. I don't quite know how I managed to be so oblivious to it, because the bottom line was, everywhere else outside of my family home, I saw a lot of patriarchal attitude. For example, I remember spending a lot of time around boys, partly because I came from a very sports playing family. And the locker room talk that I was exposed to as a kid was wild. And partly it was because men and boys congregated around this particular sports facility, and after they'd play their matches and their games, they'd sit there with beers in hands talking, and they would do this running commentary of every woman that pulled into the sports facility to pick up a kid. Like a running commentary on how they looked. They would be openly flirtatious. They would talk about whether they would flirt with her before they arrived. Some of them were married men who were then cheating with women that turned up. And they would literally sit there and talk about it and talk about what they would do. And it was just so gross. And because I was a young girl, they just presumed I didn't understand or wasn't wise enough to know. And, you know, years later, when you watch commentaries on, you know, patriarchy and toxic masculinity, and you see the likes of Donald Trump talking about grabbing women by the pussy and all the other disgusting things they say, you're like, yeah, of course, I recognize this very well. I remember a little while ago watching that Vince McMahon documentary on Netflix, where he talks about World Wrestling Federation, or entertainment as it became. And watching back some of the clips from that as an adult, apart from knowing Trump was very invested in that world and the patriarchy of it, I was shocked by the narratives of how women were represented and explored. But then also like, oh yeah, this is exactly what I used to watch every Friday night as a kid. This is what I absorbed. This is what I watched boys do in the playground and how I saw them speak. So I could not tell you how I didn't manage to turn into a feminist from that. But I think it was just so normal, so much the air I breathed in, that I just didn't realize I had a right to question it.
But you also had a different normal at home. And maybe that kind of balanced it somehow.
I think it did. It skewed it in that I just thought on a lot of issues, not just gender or sex. I thought even with race, there's just bad people and there's good people. And for many years, that was kind of my narrative. This kind of, it's a very pervasive way of thinking even now. Like, oh, there are bad women and there are bad men. And it's like, yes, but if you look at the data and the stats and where power has been held, it definitely skews in certain directions, on all these things. And I just hadn't caught up. And I think it was going to other cultures and contexts which were much more openly oppressive to women that made me reflect on how typical my family of origin was. Mm-hmm. And all of these other experiences, and look at them in their totality, including experiences of, sexual abuses as a child. We know definitely women come forward much more. I think there's some suggestion that boys don't when they experience it, but I had never somehow put all the pieces together to arrive at patriarchy is real,
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And there is a putting the pieces together, I think, because it's not just one thing.
No.
It's so many things, right? It's like you said, it's the conversations that men have in certain situations. It's what's going on at home. It's what your friends are going through. It's what's happening in the church. And then you have to piece it all together and go, oh, there is a system and there is a script and it favors this group of people over this group of people.
Yeah.
So,
and just because you experienced elements of the total opposite doesn't mean that script isn't real.
Exactly.
And I think, the thing that people don't necessarily talk about is the grief that comes with putting that together and the horror. And I remember for me that came several years before the Me Too movement gained ground, mm-hmm. and we had this reckoning around men's abuse of power. But it's just such a deep grief. And for me, it made me border on kind of misandry, like a kind of anger towards men and boys. And very often the men that have just been silent and complicit and invested in calling themselves good men, when they may not be doing something themselves, but they're happily sitting around like they were at the sports facility in my childhood, not challenging any of the men saying and doing this awful stuff. And I feel like I've seen that so many times.
So many. I mean, I've got male friends who, have earned good money from their very abusive, awful friends who do awful things to women. And they've kept silent because that friend facilitated them earning money.
Yeah.
But then turning around and almost positioning themselves as nice guys because they don't do those things.
Yeah.
But it's like, but you're silent whilst your friend does those things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or the worst one for me is, I need to help him to see the error of his ways. So that's the reason why
I'm staying in relationship
with him whilst he's assaulted this other woman. And she, but there's no understanding of how your support of him could also be an enabling of him.
Enabling and a further wound to a woman on the other end of that.
Exactly.
Who now watches this and feels they cannot speak out because that person has too much support.
Right.
And they don't know if they can count on you support, and they don't know if they can count on you to hold your peer accountable.
Exactly.
It's really challenging. For me, that kind of conditioning and set of experiences is the thing I know I would have to work with if we were going to have a boy child, because I have to not project my stuff onto them. And I'm curious about your own experiences and how you feel patriarchy shaped your life and whether it might present any challenges.
I mean, I was raised in two spheres. One was my home life, which is very, very Nigerian. It's quite a patriarchal culture. Mm-hmm. And then, as I've mentioned before, I was raised in a very fundamentalist Pentecostal Christian community, which is also very, very patriarchal.
Yeah.
So it's patriarchy squared.
Yep. P squared.
P squared, not the rapper or the rappers. In the church, it was just unequivocal. Men ruled, and that was it. And there were even, very clear Bible verses that were used to support that position. And it was by, one of probably the greatest apostles in the New Testament called Paul. And he said, I do not permit a woman to teach or to assume authority over a man. She must be quiet.
Hey.
And the reason for that in the
Quiet.
next verse, quiet. And the next verse gives the reason for that, because Adam was formed first. So this is going back to the book of Genesis, the story of Adam and Eve, right?
Yeah.
Was formed first and then Eve. And Adam was not the one deceived. It was the woman who was deceived and became a sinner. Because, the story is that the snake, the serpent gave Eve the apple, encouraged Eve to eat the apple that God had told them not to eat.
Yeah.
She ate
She realized she was naked.
She ate it and then she offered it to Adam.
Yeah.
So of course, we've never been forgiven for that act by Eve of basically taking us down the slope into where we are now. So, these were Bible verses that were used to ensure that men basically held all of the power.
Yeah.
They controlled the reins fully. So they were the leaders. They made all of the decisions.
In your church, this is?
In our church, absolutely. Now, women had a small amount of power in the sense that they could run their women's groups, their women's fellowship. So my mum was a women's fellowship leader. They could lead praise and worship because obviously women sing really well. Men do as well, but I don't know what it is about Christian churches, but women tend to certainly dominate in that area of singing and praise and worship. And then there were some women who clawed back power by just the sheer fire of their speaking in tongues and prophetic abilities, that sort of thing. And they almost sort of wrangled back some power by having these incredible prophetic abilities.
And spiritual gifts
Spiritual,
or something.
their spiritual gifts and their speaking in tongues. So I'd see that sometimes, right? But regardless, the dominant people were the men. But then, there was also this other verse that Paul, so as a kid, I'm reading the Bible as well. I mean, I've read that book from cover to cover and I was in all of the services, right? And I had my own personal sort of practice of reading the Bible. And I'm finding other verses that seemed to say something slightly different, that weren't highlighted as much as the verse that I just read. So there's a verse in 1 Corinthians, again in the New Testament, that says, in the Lord, woman is not independent of man, nor is man independent of woman. For as woman came from man, so also man is born of woman. But everything comes from God. So in that verse, it's not saying that women should be silent and keep quiet and not take any authority over a man. It's actually saying that they're both equal.
Yeah.
Similar to what you saw growing up.
Yeah.
Then to further throw another contradiction in there, is that in another book of the Bible, same New Testament, Galatians, that's the name of the book, it says that in Christ, which we all are, because we're all part of the body of Christ, that's what we called ourselves, right, as the church, the distinctions of Jew or Gentile, so that's those who are Jewish and those who aren't, those distinctions, slave or free, male or female, they're no longer relevant. Because all of us are united as one in Christ. So those distinctions that we place don't mean anything.
Yeah.
So that verse isn't even saying that we're equal. It's saying none of it means anything.
Oh.
There is no male or female. There is no Jew or Gentile. There is no slave or master. There's nothing but us as the body of Christ. They are irrelevant. So now as a kid, I'm looking at those 3 verses and I'm thinking to myself, well, are women weak and supposed to be quiet and be subservient to men? Or are we all equal? Or actually, is there no distinction between any of us? It's a mad head fuck, right?
Yeah.
So already at that age, I'm going, well, it doesn't appear that you are picking verses that make sense for me as a girl, as I was at the time. You're picking verses that make sense for you and to uphold your power. And I was already having those feelings within myself as I read some of these Bible verses. And of course, when you're asking the adults in your life about this, it's almost like, you're a kid, shut up.
Yeah.
Why are you asking these questions? And I distinctly remember that as a kid. And then if we go to where I was at home, it was quite a safe environment because I was raised by a single parent mum. So it was just me and her. It was an all-female home. We did all of our stuff. We did DIY together. So although we came from a very patriarchal church and a patriarchal culture, actually our home was very matriarchal. My mum made all the decisions.
Yeah.
She went to work. I was a classic latchkey kid in the sense that I had my key around my neck and my mum had to go to work and I let myself in and out of the house, took myself to school, made my food, let myself back in after school. And there was an element of that I would say exposed me to not so safe elements because suddenly you're a little girl out in the world,
Yeah.
encountering the realities of what it means to be a little girl out in the world. And then, of course, when I got to be a teenager, my mum married my stepdad. And suddenly we had a very Nigerian, patriarchal, authoritarian guy in the house where I'd never had that before. I had a lot of freedom with my mum and I didn't realize how much freedom I had until he came along because he was hardcore, authoritarian, strict, lacking in emotion, like, just that.
Just not connected to his own feelings.
Yeah, or even to us, it was just like he made all the rules. He decided what we ate. He decided how money was spent. He decided, how our day went in terms of like praying in the mornings and in the evenings or whatever it was, the schedule,
Yeah.
everything kind of ran the way he wanted things to run. Whereas before that, it was me and my mum doing things according to ourselves,
According to your own free will. Imagine having your own free will.
That part, right? So obviously I would find ways to subvert and get around it and try and do my own thing and assert what I wanted to assert, sometimes successfully, but mostly unsuccessfully.
I feel like it would have been a very huge transition for any teen to navigate in your home life. Mm-hmm. When you look at it now, how do you think having a male figure in the house impacted your sense of self as a girl, or even your mum's, behaviors and way of being as a woman?
My mum changed for sure.
Really?
Once she married him. I just saw a side to her that I'd never seen before. And maybe she had that side when she was with my dad, my biological father, but I didn't see that relationship. I didn't see the dynamic there. Whereas with him, I literally saw her change. Like just a certain kind of pandering to him and going along with the whole head of the household and following his rules, even if they didn't necessarily make sense and in some cases were hugely detrimental to us and the quality of our life. And it was quite jarring for me to see my independent, strong mum who works
DIY driven,
to suddenly become like this wife, of this guy. It was really quite shocking to my sensibilities and didn't really, what's that word? It didn't adhere me to that.
Endear you.
There we go.
Him. Yeah.
It didn't endear me to that way of living.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, so what do you think what did it do for you then? How did you process that?
I was like, hell to the no, will I ever be like this? It's not happening.
I know you stuck firmly to that, being married to you. You're like, I am not going to be told
at all
by anyone what to do.
I'm always open to conversations, collaborations, working things out together. I love that.
As long as you're in charge. As long as your say is final.
Oh my God, you're painting me out to be some
I'm only
patriarchal.
I'm only joking. But yeah, I mean, you've always given strong I'm in charge vibes. Like what sounds like your mum was. I mean, if there was any chance I thought you were being badly behaved or dominating in some way,
You tell me about myself.
There's no way. I like that side of you, and I like seeing it embodied in a woman. And it, obviously you saw some of those things embodied in your mum.
Yes.
And I've seen them embodied in my mum.
Absolutely. Your mum's a powerhouse.
Absolute powerhouse. But what I think you've said that is sometimes so unsayable is that you saw your mum completely change and pander. And I can tell you firsthand that I have done that in relationships with men, even as a self-professed feminist now. And I think, again, it goes back to this thing of how deeply ingrained the script is. It's almost unconscious that you sort of dim yourself down a bit, don't quite, even with men that don't try and behave in bad ways, the script is just too easy to fall into.
Yeah, because I think it's been a survival thing for women. Don't prick men's egos. Don't get too much in the way. Don't take up too much space. Don't take any power from them, because their whole identity as men is wrapped up in those things, power and status and control. So if you get in the way of that, it'd be a bit like a lioness getting in the way of two lions fighting, right? You get in the way, you're going to get ripped up. So you learn to just cool it down.
Yeah, simmer down. You're actually not wrong, because I was going to say it's quite unconscious, but I've definitely very consciously done it too.
Yeah.
Not for threat of violence, but for knowing that you're triggering a partner's ego. Even they may not be aware of it, but you're aware, if I'm too big, too bold, too this, too that, their sense of well-being diminishes. And because you care about that person, you don't want their sense of well-being to diminish.
Yes.
So you then start playing small.
Yes.
In order not to threaten them.
Exactly. But in so doing, we reinforce this idea.
We uphold the patriarchy,
Exactly.
which is exactly what this episode is about.
Exactly.
Right? And its oppressive impact on us.
Yes.
Being small, not quite being.
Yes. Half being.
Which is what half of them think we are.
Exactly. So at the top of the episode, we kind of talked about the scripts that are out there, the incel world, culture that exists online. And we asked the question, how we would approach raising our son in that climate. But then we talked about our own things, the ways we've played into patriarchy, the toxic side of patriarchy. Because I think the one thing I do want to say is that patriarchy in and of itself isn't evil. I think there is a side of patriarchy that is toxic and dangerous. Like, for example, a good father in a home who is strong, who is kind, who is loving, who shows his son how to be all of those things, I think is a good side of...
Like a patriarch. So we're getting back into this thing of, there is healthy masculinity and there is unhealthy masculinity. I think patriarchy as a system, I partly was like, because it's kind of been analysed as a system that across many millennia has been quite oppressive to women.
Of course.
But it doesn't mean you can't have good models of masculinity inside it.
Yeah. We're talking about how do we raise a son to be a good man, right? And if he has his own family, to be a good patriarch within the context of that family, right?
Yeah.
The look on your face is saying...
I'm struggling. I'm
you're
not
struggling. I can tell. I'm feeling the radiation of resistance. And then we sort of came to the fact that, we ourselves have upheld patriarchy, the toxic side of it in some ways. We've been affected negatively by it in a lot of ways, unfortunately. And as a result, our attitudes towards men, particularly as we're two women who would be raising a son, could indirectly, unintentionally, unconsciously be projected onto our son, which could have very devastating effects and long-ranging effects, not just on our son, but on the people he then goes on to impact and influence, right?
Yeah.
So I think coming towards the end of this episode, I think one of the questions that I am grappling with and also want to put out between us is what could help us to not have that effect on our son. Because I would really not feel good if I raised a son who became a black pill incel or a red pill, any kind of incel.
Any of them.
Any
None
of them.
We're nowhere on the spectrum of incel,
Right?
please.
I wouldn't like to raise a son who lacks emotional intelligence and has a devastating, abusive impact on anybody, actually, man, woman, or child, you know. I want to raise a son who is healthy, who is the fullness of himself and can express himself to the fullness of his being, a son who is alive to the world and alive to himself. I want to raise a son who understands that it's okay to be strong and to be all of the things that I like about teaching boys. You know, when I've taught boys, I love teaching them because I love that they're boisterous. I love their energy. I love the chaos and the upfrontness. I love the loudness of their voices.
Of some of them.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
but I generally really enjoy the energy of boys. And I want my son to inhabit all of the fullness of whoever he is as a boy, because he might not be that. He might be more effeminate. Whatever it is, I want him to be a good representation of himself and us as a family out there in the world.
Sorry, that was a good representation. I didn't expect that.
Do you know what I mean? And so it's like, so then what resources are we leaning on as a couple? I think for me, I believe having male role models is important.
Yeah.
I think having a father is important. That's something that we are obviously going to have to discuss because that affects our choices.
Having
in
or
the
knowing the
fertility.
father, you mean in terms of like if we were going to have a donor, you would prefer that they know
I
who
would
the
prefer
father
that
is?
they knew the father. I think having your father is so important. I know the impact of not having a father on my life.
Yeah.
It was definitely a gaping hole in my life. Nothing could fill.
So what would you say that impact was?
It's about not knowing the other half of yourself, your characteristics, not having that guidance, just that other male energy, I think. Now, obviously, it has to be a good one because I know people who've got fathers and their fathers are utter dickheads.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So it's about having a good father rather than just having a father. But I think having a father is really important. In the absence of that, having really good male role models, I think, is important. And I'm really grateful that in my life, I've got some really good men in my life, like men that I really respect,
Yeah.
where I'm like, you're a good man.
Yeah.
You're not perfect.
Yeah. No one is. Yeah.
I'm not perfect.
Yeah.
But I know that at your core, your foundation, you're solid. You're a good man.
Yeah. So you'd want the child to be around them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I don't want to digress too much, but listening to you speak about the absence of a father figure and a male figure, I am reminded of a queer parenting panel I once attended as part of a queer film festival. And there were people there who had been adopted and raised via IVF in families where there were no men. And one of the questions that was asked was, do you think you missed out, or your child is now missing out by a lack of male role models? And unanimously, people of all different backgrounds, including people who were assigned male at birth, said no. I think they missed nothing. However, what they did think was important was when there had been an adoption or an IVF or a fostering story, was having parents that could be the keepers of a child's story. And that actually the pain and the absence is, there's so many gaps about who you are. So it's an absence of a story of who you are and a knowledge about who you are rather than a maleness.
Ooh, I like that. Maybe that's what I missed out on.
And I wonder, because there's so many lesbian women and who've asked, who had concerns themselves. There were lesbian women who were there who had concerns themselves about, I didn't give them any male role models. This is going to be a problem. When they asked their kids as adults or as grown people, do you feel you missed out? The kids were like, absolutely not, including the ones who are straight. There was one woman who had a daughter who was now grown and beyond uni age and was heterosexual. And the daughter was like, I missed nothing. And she's attracted to men with a man. So I'm just throwing that out there because there are so many different types of parenting. And I feel like parenting is like about being the guardian of a story. I don't want to digress too much.
I like that though.
Yeah.
That's given me goosebumps.
Yeah, it really profoundly
Because I
impacted
feel
me
like there
too.
was a gap in knowing who I was, and nobody would answer those questions because the relationship between my mum and my father, my biological father, was so fraught and so abusive that she just didn't want to talk about it. And then the adults in my life, like my aunties and my uncles, also didn't want to talk about it. They would not tell me my story, the other half of my story.
Yeah. And I think that's really like important because it's like, in a way, they wouldn't tell you because patriarchal violence kept it from you. And yet the narrative that we're given simplistically is I missed a male figure. I'm not saying that to denigrate the importance of healthy role models who are men, but I am saying, does it need that? Is that really where the wound is? Do you know what I mean? Is it the absence of a man or responsible parents who told you your story regardless of their gender?
You know what? I've always been hungry for story. And story is so integral to my life. I go around capturing and telling people's stories and getting them to tell their story. It's so important to me. And I wonder, actually, now that you say that, am I searching for my story, trying to... Yeah, that is kind of crazy. That's kind of emotional, man.
Yeah,
you know?
I know.
That's mad.
It's a massive thing, and we should do something separate on it because there were so many profound insights about story and being able to be the guardian of a person's story and what happens when you're brought up by donor. If people tell you that story in a coherent way, no issues.
No.
But if it's not given in a coherent way or
Then you start
lied about
searching.
and then you found out later
Yeah.
that actually there was this whole, it can create issues,
Yeah.
right? But just going back to the theme that we're talking about, how do we resource ourselves? I'm not sure how much the need for male role models is primary for me. I still would want them to have role models of all types and all genders,
Yeah.
right? Definitely, no doubt
all
about
sexualities.
it. Everything.
Yeah, races.
A diversity of everything.
Yeah.
But what I do want them to have and to be is equipped to think about the world and how perceived maleness or femaleness or whatever shapes everything about their lives.
That's true.
And I don't want to be too theoretical about it because there is a very real pragmatic bit, but I know for me, the resources I would need would be ones that help me do my self-work.
Okay.
And to be able to equip them with that knowledge in a way that's healthy.
Mm-hmm.
So there are many things I could say, but I will mention two things that have stood out to me. One, there's a brilliant woman scholar called Dr. Janessa Williams, and she's a postdoc at Stanford, but I met her because she had been studying and finished her PhD at Leeds. And just before she moved over to Stanford, where she is now, we met up and had a coffee. And she told me about her research, and she studies music, Me Too, as in the Me Too movement, and fandom. And in her PhD, she interviewed a bunch of fans who were into hip hop and I believe alternative rock. And some of those fans had been essentially accused of sexual misconduct and clearly had quite patriarchal attitudes. And she told me that she had had these really long conversations with them and they had all these really difficult, problematic views. But the more and more she talked to them and asked and was curious, the more and more she worked through maybe some of what she imagined about them and discovered that they were all the things we said earlier: alone, lacking connection, not ever having anybody who cared enough to talk through how they actually felt and be present with them and listen. And, I don't like when people say empathy is important in the face of oppressive systems when you yourself are struggling. But if I was a parent, it would be my job to find out, what is my son thinking about now? What are they exposed to? And should they ever end up in a scenario where they are imbibing these attitudes and beliefs, we might have tried everything and done the best we can and they might still get there.
Yeah.
I would hope either I or one of those role models that you speak of in our lives could sit with them and hold space for them to work through that stuff and think reflectively and critically, because the biggest thing for me is I want a son with self-esteem. A son with self-esteem and a sense that he's cared for and loved and good enough is unlikely to be vulnerable to grooming and unlikely to need to misuse his power in ways that are violent to other people.
Yeah.
But also are violent at some level to his own humanity and sense of self.
You preached a word.
Did I?
Apostle
I never thought I'd
Tamanda
say that.
Walker.
I never thought I'd say that in defense of men. Like, it's actually I'm quite shocked about the things I'm saying because
I did not expect that from you. This episode, I was like, well, I have to really let you just express what you're going to express, and there's probably going to be a lot of fire and vim. But
do you know what it is? It's the shift of raising the next generation, our son.
Yes.
Because when I think about peers and my own life, do you remember that time when everyone was just "men are trash" was the hashtag?
Yeah.
Which was awful.
I was never comfortable with that
I hated
hashtag
it too.
because I don't like when you just denigrate a whole group of people. It always felt funny to me, particularly because I was surrounded by men who are not trash.
Yeah, no,
they're actually really good men, and I love them dearly.
Yeah, exactly. And I was in a relationship with a man at the time. However, there was something about my life stage then, less close to the topic of motherhood, that I was just like, yeah, I don't like the hashtag, but right now we deserve to say what we need to be saying, and we need to be heard. However, now, thinking about it as a potential mother, I'm like, that narrative isn't helpful.
Right, because our son is going to hear that men are trash, and he's like, oh, I'm going to go from a little boy to a man. So therefore, am I trash? Am I going to be trash? And then we get into that thing in our opening with those comments, those weird reasons that women give to men why they're not real men. And you go, okay, that's a shitstorm.
That's awful.
Yeah.
And how do you give a child self-esteem with that? But this is what I mean about giving them tools to think and to understand they're going to hear this, they're going to hear this. What do you think?
Exactly.
How do you feel? What does hearing this make you feel?
Yes. And it's also about us as women having conversations between ourselves about the scripts that we've been living by, that we are reinforcing in our interactions with men.
Yeah, but also, again, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because I wouldn't want to pretend that we haven't all been through that.
We've been brutalized by patriarchy.
Yeah.
Honestly, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically, we have been brutalized by patriarchy and by men who have been god-awful.
Yeah, and I think it would be important for a girl, a boy, any kid, whatever gender, to understand that as well.
They have to understand both.
All of the things,
yes.
you know? So there's that. And
but I think if I heard a woman saying that he wasn't a man because he had cats, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to tell her about herself.
Absolutely. No, you're right. Sorry, I was thinking about raising our child.
No.
Challenging
I'm talking about
people.
us challenging amongst ourselves as women as well. You know, if some woman comes to me and says, yeah, he didn't beat me about in the bedroom, that's why he's not a man. I'm going to be like, girl, sis, stop it right now.
I would have.
Why do you? But then again, maybe that's her sexual preference.
No.
It's weird.
No. I will say, sis, you and me are not the same people. It does not mean I do not love you, but you need to go direct to therapy. That's what I'm going to say.
Direct. Don't pass go. Don't collect £200.
No.
Just go direct.
No.
One of the things I really love about the way you were raised, though, is that at your foundation, there was a good man in the form of your father.
Yeah.
And I really love that.
Yeah, I should say that. I think I'm very uncomfortable with the phrase "a good man" because I think it puts so much pressure on people, and I think no one is entirely good. And
he was a human. He
showed me what it means to healthily be a man.
I like that.
He loved me without hesitation. I would say he's a bit emotionally repressed. I think that's to do with masculinity. It might also be
His
to do with being a
generation.
middle-class British man of a certain age, 86 now. But, you know, even with that, the love, the care, the affection, the freedom he gave me to be who I am and to think and to question and to push boundaries and to, I don't know, it's the same freedom I saw in his relationship with my mum. My mum was just liberated to go off and work, go off and study. Just incredible.
I love that.
And I would hope to raise a son like that.
There we go. You see? I love that. Thank you so much for listening to Rigor and Flow. We've got something to ask you.
Please do subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode and feel free to share it with a friend too.
No, definitely share it with a friend. Spread the good news of Rigor and Flow.
Amen.